and flexibility and courage. In fact, our theme for this year is creativity takes courage, and that's going to be our theme for our 10th anniversary, which this year is our 10th anniversary, which you'll hear a lot more about during the year. So I'll hold off on that for now. But I do just want to put out a big shout out to everybody on this call, to all of the staff at Creative Minds, 123 strong, to our 550 plus students next year. We're all here and we're excited about Monday because of all the courage and creativity everybody's shown and that commitment. And when I talk about commitment, I've tried to make it very clear throughout the pandemic, and I'm going to reinforce it now. And most of this presentation is going to be about this point. We always put student and community safety first, and we try to do it as transparently as we can and with great fidelity. And that's on the slide, but I want to talk a little bit about what we mean by that. Transparency is, if we don't know the exact answer, we're going to say we don't know, but as soon as we do, we'll tell you. And there'll be a couple instances of that during this presentation, because the guidance coming out of the Department of Health and the CDC literally changes daily. And we are in constant conversations with city leaders, with the mayor's office, with every other charter leader in the city, and with the chancellor of DCPS, and with OSSI, to make sure that as a city, but more importantly, as a Creative Minds community, we do this as safely and as transparently as possible. So as soon as we get information, we will share it, we will post it, and we'll put it out there for you. Also, as you all know, if you have questions, you can reach out to anybody here. You can reach out to the front desk and it will get driven to the right people to make sure you get your answers. So I just wanted to share that with you. I'm going to ask Nyamka to go to the next slide. And I'm going to turn it over to here so she can sort of talk a little bit about how one of the amazing things about this pandemic that our community has shown is how we had to embody our Creative Minds personal goals to survive and thrive. So go, Nyamka. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And yes, these personal goals continue to be at the forefront and help us guide our direction as we kind of embark on this journey with continuing with COVID for this now 18 months. And the personal goals have really been an opportunity for us to come together as a community. These are words that we've used in the past and actually have come to rely on during this time. As Chuck mentioned, being adaptable. Situation is changing constantly and quickly, and our team has been able to adapt and make changes based on current developments with data and science. The team has had to work together to ensure that our community is safe. That involves a lot of communication, a lot of back and forth, communicating with different stakeholders, leaders, teachers, our families and community, everyone. And also just thinking about integrity. We have had to, ensure that the information that we're providing to families and to our community is that we're ensuring protection for our protocols are supporting our entire community. And the biggest one that has been the resilience. We thought, when we went out last March that it would be for a short time, 2 weeks, and here we are this time later. And I'm just so excited to see how the community, our teachers with these past, we've had professional development since last Monday, have really come together and really rallied around getting ready to welcome students back to the building. The classrooms are coming along really, really nicely. Just the enthusiasm that we've seen from the team has really proven how our staff has really embraced these personal goals and excited to kind of embark on what's to come next. Here, we just have kind of an agenda, and Craig's going to kind of give you an overview of what's to come.
Great, thanks, Nyamka. For everyone new or that hasn't been on a CMI call before, I'm Craig Bednarofsky. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Creative Minds. And for this deck, I'm going to walk you through the first half, and then Heather Hesslink, who is our Director of Operations and Compliance, and can go to the umpteenth level of detail on pretty much any question that you're going to ask. We'll pick up the back end. The areas that we're going to cover, as Chuck said, we're going to kind of pause after each section. So if you see an area on here where you may have a question, if you can kind of hold it until we get to that section, that would be great. Up front, we're going to spend some time talking about the general mitigation and safety plans that we have in place, how we're going to operate, the rules by which we're going to operate, and then we'll cover a little bit of arrival and dismissal, as that is going to look a bit different this year than it traditionally has in the past. Heather will pick up with dismissal and cover dismissal, meals, and then COVID scenarios. So COVID scenarios will be all the questions around what would facilitate a return to the building if someone has symptoms, if someone tests positive, if we have to send or quarantine a classroom. So that'll all kind of be handled under the COVID scenarios. As Chuck had said, if you have questions on these sections, the best way to do it is drop it in the chat. Make sure you do it to all attendees so that everyone can see, and then we'll pause after each section and kind of tackle the questions that come up. There's a lot of information. We're going to try and hit the highlights. The deck will be shared. The presentation will be recorded if you want to loop back. And for those that definitely want to enjoy an 80 to 90 page document, the whole continuous education plan will be posted, if it isn't already, on our website. So that's for your reading enjoyment. If you can switch ahead, Nyamka. Okay, so our commitment to you and what we're doing, as well as what we need the community to do, is listed on this slide. What we need from the community is adherence to an in-person code of conduct that will be coming out. That will come out from the school in paper copy and electronic copy. And that just asks for your commitment to follow along with us in making sure that we're following the protocols, the policies, the procedures to keep everyone safe. And we're going to touch on a lot of these things in a little more detail. Masking, social distancing, maintaining cohorts of our kids within the school building and when we're outside, vaccinations and testing. So that's what we need the whole community to do. What we're going to do as Creative Minds, as Chuck said, is first and foremost, it's the health and safety of our community. We're not going to make decisions just based on what current hysteria may be or current trends. We're going to base it on the science and prioritize that first and foremost among everything. We'll be transparent about it. We'll share information with you, and then we'll hope that you do the same with us. If someone in your household is showing symptoms, that you keep them home, that you tell us about it. If you've had a close contact, we all need to work through this together. We'll provide the PPE needed and have signage and testing. We'll always meet or exceed the DC health standards. That is a bit tricky right now, as Chuck and Nyamka said, as things are very fluid. We learned of changes today on a call earlier that DC Health is implementing, and we have to react to those. So it's going to be a very fluid situation with what the guidance is, but you can rest assured that we will always meet or exceed the DC Health standards in everything that we do to reopen the school and keep it operating. There's 4 big areas that we kind of look at in terms of keeping the community safe: masking, distancing, cohorting, and vaccinations. And we'll touch on all of those a bit and go into greater detail. But these are generally the categories that everyone looks at and says, yeah, these are the critical pieces that we can do to make sure that we stay as safe as possible. Wear your mask, keep your distance, stick in cohorts, and get vaccinated. And we'll go through what these mean in a little more detail, as well as other scenarios or other aspects to that. Masking. I'm sure you all know and realize masking is required at all times, indoors and outdoors, for everyone coming on campus and into the building, right? So once you come into the campus, whether you're driving or you're walking, masks are required. No scarves, no pulling the shirt up. It needs to be a mask that fits around your nose and mouth snugly, and it must fit properly, and it cannot have valves on it. That is going to be required except when kids are eating and napping. Heather has many more details if you have specific questions on how that's applied. But in general, anytime you're on campus or in the building, the mask must be on, except for the brief times where we'll eat. And we'll also talk about how we're going to do meals a little later in the presentation, or for the younger kids when they're napping. Social distancing, the current criteria and current recommendations are 3 feet. That is how we're going to set the classrooms, or how the classrooms are set, to maintain a minimum of 3 feet between students. Elevators are 3 people. When students are sleeping, they will be arranged head to toe. Lots of other kind of operational details here. Hallways. We will have folks in the hallways making sure everyone stands to the right or moves to the right, that they're spaced out, especially when kids are coming out of their classroom to transition to the outdoors, to go to the bathroom, to go to their lockers. All staff will be all hands on deck at just about all times, making sure that all of these are being adhered to. We will do recess. The protocols for indoor and outdoor recess are still somewhat TBD. There's been some new guidance on that, old guidance on that. We can go into that in more details if you like. Bathrooms we'll cover in a bit as well. Those will be assigned by cohorts. The water fountains are filling stations only. The bubblers have been turned off. And even in terms of stairwells, which we'll cover around building logistics, the stairwell flow will be up during the morning part of the day, down during the afternoon part of the day. And in between those times, there'll be assigned stairwells for up and down to make sure folks stay separated. Our staff has an easy way to tell in the classrooms what 3 feet is. We have tiles on the floor. Each tile is 12 inches, 3 feet. So it's easy visual cues for them. Cohorting. This is critical. We had some terrific experience with this and doing this and practicing this over the summer during our ESY and boost camp process. And we take it very seriously. Strict cohorting. We will not have any intermingling, including the bathrooms, stairwells, and hallways between cohorts and groups. You see the cohorts and groups on the right-hand side of the page. And even within those cohorts, there's in essence sub-cohorts. So the 3 classrooms within first grade will still be kept separated, especially when they're eating. And that's the critical time that determines what close contact is. Heather will go into that towards the back end of the presentation and explain that in much more detail. But in general, the cohorts are defined, and then even within those cohorts, we have policies and procedures in place to keep those folks as separated as possible. 3 first grades, 3 second grades, so that if there does happen to be an outbreak in one of the classrooms, say first grade classroom A, it is unlikely that it will impact classroom B and classroom C. And Heather, again, will go through that in detail. And it's imperative, again, the close contact is being defined as when folks have their masks off when eating or napping. And again, Heather will cover that in tremendous detail towards the backside of the presentation. Vaccinations. Certainly we are encouraging all eligible students and families. So if you have students over 12 or your family members and you have not yet been vaccinated, we are strongly encouraging that. For our staff, we've shared with you a few weeks ago the policy for staff that we announced. And all staff members are required to be fully vaccinated or ask for and be granted a medical or religious exemption by September 30th, right? We cannot disclose individuals' vaccination status, but what we can tell you is that of all of our, right now, of all of our lead teachers, inclusion teachers, and E-team teachers, we have about 98% that have been vaccinated and a few that have requested and are being reviewed for a medical or religious exemption. So all lead teachers, inclusion teachers, and E-team teachers are just about vaccinated. Across our whole staff, right now we're at about 87% with other folks that have, with a small percentage of folks that have requested a medical exemption or a religious exemption. So once you factor in the possible exemptions and everyone that's been vaccinated, that takes us to about 95%. The remaining 5% we're working with to understand their situation and help move them forward in the process. The vaccinations, like I said, we are giving them until September 30th, and those that are not fully vaccinated. So if they're still working through the process between now and September 30th, or they've been granted an exemption, those folks are required to be tested weekly. So they have to produce a test every week that says they've been tested and tested negative. We will also be holding a flu and vaccination clinic on October 29th. Our hope is by that point, the vaccination will have been approved for children under 12, and that we can get as many students as possible that haven't yet been vaccinated by that point, come to school, get vaccinated there, and start the process. So Heather will share more details around that as the time approaches. So right now we're on a good path to have just about all of the staff vaccinated. Again, those that we are providing accommodations to will be a percentage of it, a small percentage of it. And then everyone that is not fully vaccinated will have to be required to get that test weekly. If they have not been given a medical or religious exemption and they have not completed the vaccination by September 30th, we will deal with those in HR, and most likely, we're still sorting out the details. They'll be placed on administrative leave until we can determine their future situation being employed at Creative Minds. Next slide, Nyamka. Okay, the daily screener, and I see there's questions popping up again. When we get to a break point, we'll loop back and pick up the questions from these sections that we've covered. The daily screener, super easy, worked tremendously well during when we came back in the spring of last year and over the summer when we had about 200 kids in the building total. You download it, you answer the questions each day. When we go through the drop-off procedures, you roll up, you show the screener. If it's a green color, you're cleared to come in. If it's orange, you're not allowed to come into the building and you'll be sent home. So super easy to use. Everyone will be required to do it. If you forget to do it, our staff will have to ask you a series of questions before your child exits the car and starts to come toward the building. Testing and sentinel surveillance. We've been doing sentinel surveillance and testing for a while. We started last spring or before last spring to get folks tested when we were coming back into the building. When did we start, Heather? December 2020. So it's been in practice for quite a while. Thank you. And the testing, again, will be weekly random testing. You'll be getting forms to consent to allow students to be randomly tested. We're partnering with Shield T3. The test is a saliva-based test versus a nasal swab. And then once you opt in once, you can be randomly selected. For the folks that are unvaccinated, they will have priority and we will test them every week as part of the testing process. The other testing, symptomatic, oops, sorry. Whoops, I am having a slight computer issue on my end. My screen has gone blank. Bear with me. Okay, now it's back. Thanks for the patience there. So the testing program, we'll get going. We're doing a test this week, and then we'll continue that throughout the school year. Daytime cleaning. We have a tremendous cleaning crew. We have very high standards. Heather has very high standards. We have a very detailed checklist of everything they are required to do throughout the day to keep the building clean. Those folks will be moving around the building all day, focused on disinfecting high-touch surfaces, wiping handrails down, wiping the water fountains down, push bars, lockers, doorknobs, rotating through the bathrooms to ensure those are cleaned several times a day. The staff will assist with cleaning desks before and after every meal. All manipulatives and cots that are being used during the day will also be cleaned daily. The cleaning staff, we are also making sure that they do not go into a classroom unless it's an absolute emergency. And for example, if someone has vomited or there's other bodily fluids to clean up, then they will enter, but that is to maintain the strict cohorting. So even to the level of the folks who's moving around the building and who's going into the classrooms, we're keeping a very tight eye on and have very defined procedures around. The nighttime cleaning, we also have a night crew that comes in. So after folks leave the building is deep cleaned every night, consistent with the DC health guidelines. All high touch surfaces are disinfected again. The floors are cleaned and disinfected. Every Friday, we do an entire electrostatic spraying of the building. That happens every week. And the COVID cleaning protocols, there's tremendous level of detail around what will happen if there is a case or a suspected case within the building, for the entire building, for where someone may have been, and for in the classroom or the office or wherever they may be. So those are the daytime and the nighttime cleaning procedures. Again, many layers underneath this of things that are going on, but that's just to let everyone know that at the highest level, we have all the cleaning that happens during the day and at night. Ventilation. Each room in the building and each office in the building has a HEPA UVC filter that does kill the COVID virus and filter it out of the air, right? When those machines are on high, they change the air every 10 minutes. We've instructed staff on how to use them. They've been trained how to use them. Filters will be changed as soon as on a regular schedule. Each space also has a personal protective equipment supply, gloves, masks, robes, and the like that's in each office rather, and in each classroom. Hand sanitizing stations are throughout the building as well. Staff and students will make sure that they hand sanitize as well as follow good hygiene procedures of washing their hands several times a day throughout the schedule. Okay, before I get into kind of arrival and then dismissal, let's take a look at kind of what's in the chat. Stephanie, I don't know if you want to call out certain questions, if you can lend a hand there.
We have a question about whether kids are getting tested too, and a couple really thought that, and unvaccinated students and the other girls could be tested.
I didn't quite catch the question. I'm not sure, Heather, if you did. You were very staticky.
I did catch the question because I was reading the chat while you were talking.
Okay.
There's a lot of questions about the testing and who it involves and what it involves. So we will be using, do you want me to answer with this one?
Yes, please go.
Go for it, Heather.
Thank you. We partnered with a company called Shield T3. We will be doing weekly testing every week. The testing includes both staff and students. Anybody who signs a consent form, your child will be randomly assigned a testing day. So it may not be every week, but we will be doing testing weekly. You will be notified if your child the morning of the testing or the day of the testing that your child was randomly selected. That is probably the basis of it. It's a saliva-based test, so there's no nasal swab. Literally, kids get to drool in a cup. So for some kids, that'll be really, really exciting. And for some kids, that'll be really offensive. But we will train everyone and hopefully it will go very smoothly and it will be very effective.
And for staff, there's related to that question about staff who have an exemption. They will be prioritized in that testing, but they also, in the weeks, if they're not tested, they still have to provide negative tests. So every single week, someone who is not vaccinated for a religious or medical exemption will get tested hands down. It's just not a possibility for them to be in the building without a negative test. Just to be crystal clear about that.
And then, Chad, if you could speak to why staff have their due date of September 30th for vaccinations.
Yeah, so there was a question, and it's asked quite a bit at all the schools we talked to, is so why are you mandating now? Why didn't you mandate earlier? There's a lot of reasons around that. It wasn't recommended to mandate until very recently. In fact, we decided to mandate before the mayor made it a requirement for government employees and for the city schools. But we've just been following the guidance from and when I say guidance, I mean not only the health guidance, but also legal guidance on what, as an employer, we can and cannot do. And we felt that even though it wasn't crystal clear at that time, we could do it. We decided we were going to do it and mandate it. As a public employer, we are a little different because we use public tax dollars. So we had to examine it a little bit more carefully. It does create sort of a lag in the timeline, and we are aware of that. That's why, again, we tried to get out of the gate before DCPS and other schools. What I can say is, so long as folks are in the process, and most should be done by the 30th, completely done. And the vast majority, as Craig mentioned earlier, and I saw some questions about the numbers too, and some confusion around the numbers that I'll ask Craig to address in a minute. But we are pushing as hard as we can to be basically 95+% vaccinated, if not 100% vaccinated or exceptions. We decided this summer that we could in fact make it a job requirement. And we explained that in professional development when all of our staff came back and began their jobs and made sure that they understood what the requirements were. But we did more than just requirement. We said, this is how we're going to help you. Here's all the vaccination sites. We'll help you there. If you need to take time off from PD, we will still pay you to go get vaccinated, because we certainly didn't want to put people out, but also we needed to encourage them. And we went on a large education campaign of our staff throughout the entire pandemic to explain the benefits of vaccination. We also, I think Craig mentioned on October 29th, we're going to have a vaccination event at the school, which we're very hopeful and optimistic that the age limit will go down from 12 down to hopefully 2 or K for approval of the vaccination. As we know, just yesterday, they moved it from emergency approval to full approval with the FDA. So we're trying to follow the lead of the experts. We're trying to move as fastly, I don't even think that's a word, as quickly and as safely as possible. So I hope that answers that question. And Craig, can you address sort of why we're really optimistic about having very high numbers? And I think maybe emphasize the fact that if someone refuses to get vaccinated, they're not going to be able to be in our building. That's basically what it comes down to.
Right, and unless those folks have been granted a religious or medical exemption, and then those folks will be required to be tested weekly. And I've seen some questions about the numbers. Let me restate what the numbers are, as I may have kind of jumbled them up a bit and misspoke on one. Right now, we are at about 87 to 88% of the staff fully vaccinated. We have about 8% of the staff that has requested a religious or medical accommodation that we're reviewing with HR and making a determination on. And then about 5% of the staff that we're still working with to determine exactly what their status is, if they've started the vaccination process and where they are in that, and if they intend to get vaccinated. For those staff that are not fully vaccinated by September 30th or have been granted a religious or medical accommodation, they most likely will be placed on administrative leave until we determine their future employment status with CMI. So hopefully that kind of clears up the vaccination question. If I didn't catch that fully, then please just drop it back in the chat. I'm skimming the other questions now. Close contact, Heather will talk about close contact. Policies and procedures about aftercare. We'll follow the exact same strict policies and procedures and protocols that we have during the day. So that will be the same. Will there be any flexibility on wearing masks when it comes exclusively to outdoor play? That's a good question. That's a hard question, right? Right now, we are following the mask on at all times policy. Certainly, if it is extremely hot outside and a teacher notices a child, or if it's too hot, we won't be outside for an overly long period of time or be resting in the shade. But we'll also be watching for kids that are showing signs of that being too much in the heat and pull them aside and treat them separately. But otherwise, Chuck, I don't know if you want to chime in, or Nyamka, the policy is going to stick with masks at all times.
Yeah, there's several factors that that inform that decision. One, and probably the biggest one, is AFRH requires it for you to be on campus, indoors or out. So that we're working with them, and we agree that that's the best practice. Also, masks have been shown to be the most effective ways to prevent the spread. What we're working on here at CMI is a very layered approach. As many layers of security and safety and protection as possible need to be in place. That may not mean every single one is in place at every single moment in the day, but if you have the vast majority in place, what we've learned from other schools that have been open for three weeks already, or from schools that opened earlier, or from CDC results, is that the more layers in, the safer your families are going to be and your kids are going to be. So that's why we have all of these layers on. And masks have proven to be most effective. So we're going to support that one big time. Like, as an example, I don't want to jump the gun, but lunchtime is 15 minutes because the definition of close contact is 15 minutes unmasked, right? So kids have to eat fast. That's really what it comes down to. So Heather will talk about that in detail and the science behind it, but that's just another one of the layers I wanted to give an example of.
Yep. Okay. Let me just skim, and then we can loop back, because I want to make sure we cover all the information, but also that we answer everyone's questions. Around lunch, we'll talk about that in more detail in a few slides. Some questions on meals. We've addressed most of the vaccination questions. Heather, do you want to define what a cohort is, or how we define a cohort?
Sure. So we are defining a cohort as a group of individuals that interact together. They can intermingle. As we said in the earlier slide, we have cohorts of preschool and pre-K as one cohort. Kindergarten is a different. We have grades 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4. They're all each their own cohort. We have 2 middle school cohorts. Grades 5, 6 is one cohort, and grades 7, 8 is another cohort.
Okay, thanks. Yes, the air filters will be on high throughout the day. Someone asked IEP services. I'm with the strict cohorting. Nyamka, Emmanuel's not on. I don't know if you want to take quickly just address how we will provide services for those with IEPs.
Sure. So for example, like in the past, we may have grouped students together in different grade levels. We will not be doing that. So for example, if a student's IEP meeting those needs, we're going to ensure that they are just with students, with staff or students who are in their cohort, who are in their group. There will be teachers who work with students in various grades, but they will be in separate, they would not occur with students in those grade levels. And during that time, when a teacher, for example, a speech pathologist is meeting with a third grade student, they would have their mask on. And when that session went over, if they would clean any session, any materials that were used with that student, when they moved to a different group.
Great, thanks. There was also a question if families or family members or parents show proof of being vaccinated, will they be allowed in the building? The short answer is no. We are minimizing the number of folks coming into the building. If you have a meeting with a staff member, that will be allowed, or an IEP meeting or similar. But in general, to pick up or drop off students, families are not going to be allowed into the building. And again, that is for safety reasons. Not trying to keep you from your child, not let you say goodbye to them. But at the same time, we have to strictly and tightly control who's coming into the building and minimize that as much as possible. Virtual classes, Chuck, you want to tackle that one now or down the road? Will virtual classes be an option? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm muted. So are virtual classes an option if people so choose? No, is the short answer, and that answer has been handed down by the Office of State Superintendent and the Mayor's office. There are some virtual schools that families can enroll in and things like that, but currently the directive we are all operating under is there are only two exceptions that there are only medical exceptions allowed, and they have to be student-based medical exceptions, not family-based medical exceptions to being in-person education. The mayor has talked about that all summer long. There's clear guidance coming out of OSSI around that, and that's how they're going to be looking at schools going forward. Those are sort of our big bosses. Certainly, if there's medical exemptions in place, and those, Heather can answer questions either offline about that, how you go through that process, but you apply, you have a doctor sign off, and if it's approved, then we figure out how to do virtual education for your child who requires it for medical reasons. Yeah, I think that's probably the short and easiest answer to that question. We will have the capacity to do it, of course, should we have to, given the circumstances regarding the virus. We pivoted pretty well, and we're prepared to do it again, and we've planned for that contingency, but we are not starting the year with a virtual option for families.
Right, okay. Thanks, Chuck. Couple questions on lunches, meals, snacks we'll cover in a few. Heather will pick that up. I'm just skimming for any other big ones that I'd like to keep going with the questions and loop back so that we're staying on time, or as on time as we can, while still making sure all of your questions get answered. Arrival for, in some regards, will work the same as it has in the past, and in other regards will work a bit different. Same thing with the carpool lane as it's always been. When you come in through Harwood Gate, make sure you stop at the guard gate. They'll make sure you have your pass. Again, most importantly, what do we need to have on? Masks, even if you're in your car. Once you come on campus, you need to have your mask on. Pull all the way up to the main entrance, all the way down to the end. Walkers and bikers will still come in through Eagle Gate and proceed to the designated entrance. And we're going to go over some first 2 weeks of school specific arrival processes in a minute. Make sure you have the health screener done. It'll greatly speed things up and make everything easier on everyone. If you have the screener completed before you come on campus, and just hold it up and flash it once you roll up to the drop-off lane or you walk up. We have assigned doors for everyone to go through. Staff will be outside helping folks get to where they need to go, making sure they get into the building and directed properly through the proper entrance. And then students will go directly to their cohort. So that's the general arrival process. that most folks are used to. We also ask that please, if at all possible, I know sometimes it's hard, do not get out of your cars. We're going to have staff on by to help the kids get out of their cars. We need to drop and go and let kids get moving with the staff members assisting them. We understand there will be some separation issues. There always are. That's a circumstance that you can certainly help deal with. But for the most part, if at all possible, stay in your vehicle, let the student get out. We'll take good care of them, walking them from the car into the building to make sure they're taken care of, and then pull off so that we can move what's probably going to be about 400 cars in and out of there in a very short period of time. The first 2 weeks of school, how we gather and how we come into the building is going to be slightly different. For kids in K through 8, we're going to gather outside in designated areas that are properly distanced so that folks can come into the building and learn how to enter the building and which doors they come through properly. We have a lot of new kids that haven't been in the building, and instead of just sending them directly into the building and not knowing exactly where they're going, and also to avoid having them intermingle with other kids, we're going to group them in cohorts and then bring them in an orderly manner to start the year off. Pre-K and pre-K4 will go directly to the classroom. Those folks will be dropped off in front of the school or walked up. The staff will greet them there and take them directly into the building and into their classroom. Breakfast will be in the classroom for kids once they arrive, and then the school day will start. We'll move everyone in. That's for the first 2 weeks of school. After the first 2 weeks of school, it'll be the normal drop off. You roll up to the carpool lane, drop them off. By that time, kids should be really well practiced to know exactly where to go and through which door and through which stairwell. Inclement weather. In case we have rain like we did this past Friday, or it's not pleasant out in the mornings, we will not make kids stand outside in the rain and muster them out in the grassy areas. We will adjust and have them go directly to their designated entrance and make sure they get to their designated classroom. We will also muster them indoors for some of the kids. We have space in the main hall, the middle school gym, and the lower school gym to spread kids out, make sure they're distant, and then take them to their proper classrooms. And again, families will not be permitted to enter the building during inclement weather for arrival or for dismissal. After the first 2 weeks, we covered that already, where students will come in, go directly to their classrooms. And then I think we start to touch on dismissal. Heather, if you want to pick it up from here and let folks hear a different voice for a while.
Sure. So I will start talking about dismissal. So we will dismiss at normal times. We will be dismissing outside. The different cohorts will be dismissing in different spots. So pre-K and preschool, basically ECE will be releasing in front of the school where drop-off lane is. All other students will be releasing in the grassy field. We have ordered giant lawn signs, so it'll be clearly marked which cohort goes where, so everyone will have their own spot. The dismissal flow, at dismissal time, a staff member will escort the students to their assigned gathering point. We will maintain social distancing. For families, if you would please park in lot 5 at the bottom of the hill and then walk up to get your students. That is really the best way to get them, so we don't have problems with traffic backing up all over the campus. As a reminder, we are not allowed to park near the playground, and we are not allowed to park in lot 4 for the residents parking for the Armed Forces Retirement Home. When we're picking up kids, it's kind of important to not linger and intermix between the cohorts. Also, the playground will be unavailable because we will be getting ready to use it for students who remain for aftercare. And inclement weather, we did this in the spring, and I'm gonna beg everyone now for their patience and their forgiveness because it's a little bit slower than walking up to grab them. What we will do if the weather is horrible is all students will remain in the classroom with the teachers. We will set up a tent or two in front of the school, and we will have staff there, and you will walk up to the tent. You will please tell us the names of your children or the children you are picking up. We will notify the front desk. The front desk will actually call up to the classroom, and each student will be dismissed individually. That way we can maintain social distancing while not subjecting children to downpouring rain. That's pretty much the inclement weather dismissal. If your child is staying for aftercare, when the normal dismissal happens, they will actually remain in their designated classroom, and they will eat snack there. And I'll get to a little bit more about why that's important. And then they will move into their after school activities and cohorts. The cohorts will be, the grade level cohorts will be maintained even during aftercare, so they'll be in the same group. Our meal policy, which I noticed a lot of people were asking about, weather permitting, students will eat lunch outside. For us, weather permitting basically means that it's not predicted to rain during the lunch hour. Also that the weather is tolerable and that the areas where they lunch are not sopping wet. If the weather is not cooperative, students will eat lunch in their classroom. Nobody will be eating breakfast, lunch, or snacks in the main hall due to some of the social distancing and requirements regarding safety and the like. All right, so now we can talk about the COVID exclusion. Talk about the COVID exclusion criteria. If you complete the Daily Screener app and you get an orange screen, please stay home. It doesn't matter if you get the orange screen for one child or if you have 12 children in your house, please do not come to the school. The exclusion criteria for COVID right now is if you are explaining fever, vomiting, diarrhea, a cough, shortness of breath, loss of taste or smell, please do not come to school. If you have 2 or more like symptoms that are on the right-hand side of the slide, please stay home. If you have like for example, if your child has asthma and all of a sudden they're having a cough or shortness of breath and it's related to the asthma, you do not have to consider that a exclusion criteria. But if your child normally does not have asthma and they're coughing, you probably should leave them at home. So that's pretty much the exclusion criteria. So to make it really easy for families, what we have done is we have created basically a simple flow chart with yes or no questions. You read the first question, you answer yes, you answer no, and you just follow along, and it'll let you know whether or not you're cleared to come to school or what you should do based on the current guidelines from DC Health and also what the school is. Different scenarios to consider are if you have COVID-like symptoms in your house, if there's a positive case in your house, please do not come to school. If you have COVID-like symptoms, but you get an alternative diagnosis, like you go to the doctor and they say it's not COVID, but you have, I don't know, an ear infection that's not necessarily contagious, that's a little different. If somebody in your household, if your child is exposed to somebody who's a close contact, and if you travel and you're unvaccinated, the flow tree, the decision tree will come all the way out and it will work through these criteria with you. So, for example, when we're talking about a student exhibiting COVID-like symptoms, if you are exhibiting COVID-like symptoms before you come to school, the daily screener will actually ask you to stay home. And when you show the screening results, you will be not allowed to come into school. If for some reason during the day, your child starts exhibiting COVID-like symptoms, what will happen is there's actually a form at each door and the child will go to the isolation suite and we will evaluate the symptoms. And if we believe that they're exhibiting COVID-like symptoms, we will call you to come get them. If you have a health consent form on file for the testing program, we can actually have the child drool into a cup and perform the COVID test before you come pick up your children. If you're exhibiting COVID-like symptoms, before you can return to the school, you have to do one of 3 things. Option 1 is to go to the doctor and have the doctor verify that it is not COVID. If you use this option, you just need to bring the doctor's note that says your child was seen. We don't need to see the actual diagnosis. The other thing is you can take a COVID test and self-isolate until the results return. And again, like I mentioned, as part of our testing process, if your child has a consent form, we can actually run the COVID test before they leave school. So you should get the results within 24 hours. And the other thing you can do is wait 10 days. For example, that's pretty much it. You can wait 10 days. I'm seeing the slides change slightly. So we can go to the next slide if you want. If you are in close contact with somebody who's identified as COVID positive, if you are fully vaccinated and not exhibiting any COVID-like symptoms, you are free to return to the building with no exclusion. If you're not fully vaccinated, you have 2 choices. You can either self-isolate from 10 days from the last date of contact with the person, or you can present a negative COVID test after isolating for 7 days. The newest guidelines change 7 to 5 days, but roughly if you wait 5 to 7 days and get a COVID test, if it's negative, you're more than welcome to come back. If at any time when you are isolating, you start exhibiting COVID-like symptoms, you need to go back to the decision tree and start at the top and answer yes to the question, are you experiencing COVID-like symptoms, and follow the results. The next scenario is if you've traveled. This one's a little bit different than some other DC health guidelines as of late. If you are fully vaccinated, you are cleared to return. However, if you are not fully vaccinated, our requirements for the school are that you must present a negative COVID test taken 3 to 5 days after returning from travel, or you must self-isolate for 10 days and not become symptomatic. So that's pretty much it. The travel policy does not apply if you are traveling to Maryland or Virginia. Otherwise, it's any other high-risk state or high-risk country, which pretty much is everywhere else in the world right now. All right, if you have a case of COVID in your household, please notify the COVID point of contact. I happen to be the COVID point of contact. My email is heather.hesslink@creativemindspcs.org. Please let us know so we can start taking all the proper precautions. If you are, please do not come back to the building until you've been cleared by the school or by DC Health. If you are asymptomatic and tested positive in your household, it's 10 days from the positive test. If you are having COVID-like symptoms, or you test positive for COVID and you are actually exhibiting COVID symptoms, you must wait 10 days and be symptom-free for 24 hours without any medication. So that's pretty much it for the case in the household. Next slide. All right, is there a next slide?
No, that's all I have.
Awesome. So what is considered a high-risk area? I see this as a question. A high-risk area right now, it's identified by the DC of the coronavirusdc.gov. If you pretty much look at a map, it's everywhere in the world. However, DC and Maryland and Virginia are currently excluded. It really does change based on how many cases, and it's based on the rate of transmission in a certain area. So that's pretty much it for that.
Okay, sorry, Heather, I was scrolling through the questions. Did you cover kind of the travel policy and the requirements around that?
Yes, I think we did. So the travel policy is pretty simple. If you are fully vaccinated, you are free to return to the building without self-isolating. If you are not fully vaccinated, which means that you've had the final dose plus waited 2 weeks, you need to self-isolate at home for 3 to 5 days upon returning to travel, and then get a COVID test. If the COVID test is negative, you can present the negative COVID test and return to school, or you can self-isolate for 10 days.
Okay, questions still coming in. What I'd like to do is kind of loop back to some of the questions from before, and then we'll pick up with some of the newer questions that have come in. So I'm going to go to Nyamka with a couple questions about learning approach and environment. One kind of 3 parts, and I'll try to make them short for you. One was outdoor, if you could address kind of outdoor learning and how we're going to approach that. If we're going to continue to use Seesaw, and then kind of what a general instructional day looks like.
Sure. So with the first part with outdoor learning, we are not switching to an outdoor learning where all classes will be outside for instruction. We will continue, as teachers have done in the past when we were in person, if there's a lesson that lends itself to, something related to nature or outside, then we will have opportunities for teachers to go out and do those lessons, but it will not be an exclusive where teachers will be outside providing instruction on, for most of the students' day, but there will be opportunities for students or for teachers to go out to do lessons outside. The use of Seesaw, we will be continuing with Seesaw. Seesaw is actually a great opportunity as a student portfolio. And when we moved to a virtual instruction, we kind of shifted it to kind of be our management tool, our management way to engage with students. We will continue to use Seesaw. It will be slightly different, but yes, we will still be using the Seesaw since most of our students are familiar with it, and it's a great way to document student learning over time. What will classroom instruction look like? It will kind of be some of the things that we had pre-COVID, but then we also will have some differences. Some of the same things that you'll see, there'll be lots of opportunities for team building for students to get to build relationships and get to know their teachers and students. And that'll be done through morning meeting and various opportunities throughout the day for them to connect and engage in small group lessons. Some things that will look a little bit different. Students will be, eating outside or in the classroom versus the cafeteria like they have done in the past. Also, opportunities to go to the bathroom that will be a little bit more limited to ensure that students are not crossing in the hall. We still will have at least 2 adults in the classroom who will be able to support student learning, which is fantastic. So when we have back to school night, you'll have a better sense of what that looked like for each of your grade levels from early childhood through 8th grade. It'll be slightly different, but you'll have more sense of what their day-to-day will look like for each of those grade levels.
Great, thanks, Nyamka. A couple more lists of questions to go through before I start looking at the newer ones. Throw it over to Chuck. We had a question about, certainly we understand some folks are considering homeschooling their child, and what CMI may do to collaborate with them on that, or how we would approach homeschooling.
Yeah, certainly homeschooling means you're no longer enrolled in the school in essence. And we can talk with each individual case and try to figure out how we can best support a transfer to homeschooling. In essence, the home becomes the LEA, or the local education agency. There are requirements, and you have to be approved by the Office of State Superintendent for Education to ensure that the child is getting an education that the state deems appropriate, or OSSI, we're not state obviously, but OSSI deems appropriate. And there are forms to fill out. There's an application process. We're happy to offline, if someone is interested in that, email us. We can direct you to the right people at OSSI if that is your choice. Yeah, and I think that's probably the best thing. We could certainly, if you're contemplating it and you want to talk to us and ask us more specific questions one-on-one, please do. We're more than happy to do it. We do it every single day, almost all day long, where someone calls with the question and says, well, what about, oh, gives us different scenarios. And together we will do what we can to help make the best decision that's for your child, because that's why we're all in this business, is to do what's best for your child. So please feel free to reach out on any of those things to any of us on this call.
Okay, I'm going to jump to Heather for a couple logistical and process related things. One, I'll just answer quickly. Drop-off time starts at 8:15 and runs until 8:45. 8:45 to 9 is generally a bit of a grace period for arrival. And then after 9, a student is considered tardy. So then Heather, if you can pick up to quickly on what the process will be around these protocols for a late arrival or an early pickup.
Absolutely. So if you're running late, school starts at 8:45, and between 8:45 to 9:15, we will actually have staff that will wait outside to screen late arrivals and to greet them. After 9:15, students will need to come to the main entrance. You will need to buzz in, and we will have somebody from the ops team come meet them at the door, make sure the screening is good, and then either let them into the building to go directly to their cohort, or if they're younger, to escort them to their cohort. That's the late arrival process. Early dismissal. We realize that sometimes people need to leave early. The best way to do this is to contact the front desk at cmipcs.org, or to call the front desk and let us know you're coming. When you arrive, somebody will meet you at the door, and they will have you sign out. We will call up to the classroom on the phone, and then the students will come down. So that's pretty much the early dismissal. It's not much different than in previous years, other than parents should not be coming to the front desk.
Great. Okay, Heather, and I'm going to stick with you. This is a really good question around kind of a medical condition such as asthma or coughing versus a COVID symptom, or if a child has some recurring stomach ache issues that's not yet fully diagnosed. Again, the difference between something like that and a COVID symptom, and how we would differentiate or treat those.
Great. So COVID-like symptoms, a lot of the time they're defined as new or worsening. If you have a medical condition, or if you have an unknown medical condition that you are being treated for, like common stomach aches, just a note from the doctor that's on file with the school nurse is enough to, when you're answering the screening questions, to say no. You just want to make sure that the symptoms are consistent with the condition that's either been diagnosed or is in the process of being diagnosed. For example, if your child has asthma and they only have asthma when they're running, if they wake up and they're coughing and they sound like, a barking seal, that's probably not asthma, and you need to use your best judgment on how to keep the child safe and to keep the entire community safe. So a lot of it, again, this is a community effort. It's going to take everyone in the community to make sound choices regarding health and safety. And so this is one where you as the parent we are trusting you to make the best decision and to be honest and accurate with the condition of your child and with your family.
Great, thanks, Heather. I'm going to go to Chuck around a question around under what circumstances may we decide to close a school, and then kind of Heather and Iamka, we can all kind of tag team on what does what's going to be the decision to quarantine a whole cohort or a classroom.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, that is the big question that everybody's trying to address right now. What will it take to return to March 13th, 2020, when we had to close the school? On Thursday, all of the charter school leaders are meeting together to come to an agreement around what those criteria are likely to be. We don't have the exact criteria laid out yet. We have a lot of schools that are thinking about it. We're thinking about it. What we're doing, everything we've been focused on is mitigating that possibility. So that's why we have the small cohorts. That's why we're focused on the close contact. So if one child pops off, but they've only had 3 or 4 close contacts during lunch, and they've got a seating chart at lunch, so we know exactly who is sitting next to them and when they were there, it may only have to be those 3 or 4 children based on whatever the current guidance is. At the most, it will probably be just that class versus the entire grade. So that's what we're trying to do, is decrease the amount of time kids are outside of school. That is the biggest focus. So what we would do is certainly is what we've done since the beginning. We're going to continue to follow the science. We're going to continue to have open and transparent conversations about the data, about the risk around the Delta variant and whatever other variants are developed. We will be sending something out after that charter meeting where I think what we're going to try to do is talk a little bit about sort of what those parameters are, right? I don't know exactly what it's going to look like. We've got a couple drafts together, and I don't want to, as I promised, I'm not going to share you something that isn't already carved in stone. I'm going to be honest, and we're going to operate with fidelity. So, other schools that have opened have taught us some very good lessons about the ability to not have to shut down, but to be able to just have a quarantine of a small cohort and to continue to teach them. So I think it's not the most satisfying answer but we will tell you as soon as we are sure. We're going to try to build thresholds. And when I'm talking about thresholds, it might evolve around so many staff are out that we can't teach, or it might be so many students are out that we don't have students to teach. And we're going to look at it from both lenses. This is the exact same exercise that DCPS was going through with us today on the phone at the mayor's call, trying to figure out what those parameters are. And folks are still working on what the numbers are, but we'll just keep you posted. I know it's not the most satisfying answer because I wish I had a crystal ball. I wish I could tell you 100% certain when things are going to get better. But what I can tell you is all of the things we're going to do to make it as good as possible.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Chuck. Heather, I'm going to go back to you with, is a rapid test acceptable, or do we require a PCR test?
Well, it says either one, and a lot of the rapid tests have gotten much better. But yes, and even the PCR test, for example, with our Sentinel surveillance we've been doing from now until next Thursday with Elaine Ellis, they do a PCR test and they return the results around in about 6 hours. So you can actually get a PCR test much faster than before. It is definitely the gold standard. If you do the Binox now or the rapid test, if it's positive, you should consider yourself positive. If it's negative, it has a higher false negative rate, and you may want to consider following up with a PCR test.
Great, thanks very much. And I'll stick with you for one more around lunch. Some folks have asked, is lunch provided or do they have to bring one from home? How do the meals work this year?
Okay, well, we have multiple options. As always, you are more than welcome to bring a lunch from home. Please remember we are a nut-free school, so no nuts. Also, with your lunch, realize that students do not have access to a microwave or to a refrigerator, so it needs to be self-contained, if you will. This year, because of the pandemic and the way that the National School Lunch Program is being offered, we are able to offer every student who is interested free lunch. You just have to opt in so we know to, 1, order your child food, and 2, understand if your child has any dietary restrictions. We don't want to feed families who are vegetarian, non-vegetarian meals because we don't know. So the sign up is right there in the chat. You can opt in. With the lunches, as always, breakfast is always free to all students. Lunch again this year is free. It's available at a cost of $0.00. And snacks for students who are staying for aftercare or after-school enrichment activities, they will be provided free of charge as well.
Great, thanks very much. Masks, do they need to be a specific material, Heather, or can they be any material as long as they're well-fitting around the nose and mouth area?
So we are not dictating the material. We're not telling you they have to be cotton. We're not telling you they should be multiple layered. They should be durable. They should be well-fitting to the child, which means that they fit well around the mask, the nose, as well as around the cheeks, and they should cover to the chin. They should not have a valve. That's probably the biggest one. The gator style mask or a scarf or using a t-shirt for your mask is not a mask. If at any time you either forget the mask at home, I know this happens. I had children and there was a time we left the house and nobody had shoes. So I understand it's pretty easy to leave a mask at home. The Creative Minds has masks by the door and every classroom has masks. So if your child loses their mask, if it gets dirty, it's not a problem. We're happy to provide a mask as needed.
Yep. And you're the winner again, Heather. One more follow-up before I try to mix it up a little bit. Can you go over again what a close contact is and what will happen if there's a positive test in a classroom?
All right, great. So a close contact, if you are over the age of 18, there's a different definition than if you are a student. Typically, as an adult, if you are in a close contact, like if you were at work or something, the definition is 15 feet unmasked, or 15 minutes unmasked at a distance of 6 feet or less, and that's a cumulative time. In a school environment for students, the definition of a close contact is basically 3 feet or less unmasked if anybody is improperly masked. So if students are wearing their mask properly and their masks are on and they're in a class dorm environment, for example, like in small groups for math or small groups for reading, they are not considered a close contact. However, the second they take off their mask, or if they're unable to wear the mask, or if they're eating lunch, then they would be deemed a close contact. So this is why we keep talking about the cohorts. Although the cohorts are grade level, which means that during a given day to facilitate learning, I'm going to use fourth grade as an example. All the fourth grade classes, they can kind of intermingle around and break up into small groups based on whatever the criteria are, whether it's reading ability, whether it's working with students of different academic levels, or if they're working in small groups, that's not a problem. However, the students will be assigned to a sub cohort or a small group or a classroom. The students in the classroom will have strict seating charts, and those are the groups that they'll be taking their masks off to eat with and things like that. So that if somebody tests positive, for example, in the fourth grade, 3 weeks ago, if somebody tested positive, everyone in the cohort, so every fourth grader would have been asked to stay at home and self-isolate for the 10 days. The reason we keep using self-isolate as opposed to self-quarantine is they have different meanings. Self-isolating is what you're doing to protect yourself. You are quarantining if you are COVID positive. So the sub-cohorts are the groups in the smaller groups. It's really when the masks are off. We are doing strategies like keeping them in small groups. They will always eat together. So the same cohort that is eating breakfast will also be eating lunch. And if they're staying for aftercare, they will be eating snack with the same group in order to really make sure that we are minimizing the exposure of the entire school or the entire grade level.
Okay, thanks. And let's follow on with that. And let me throw it over to Nyamka around if we do have that situation and a classroom has to be sent home to quarantine. What is the approach for the instructional approach for those kids?
Sure, that's still to be fleshed out, but I can give you a little glimpse of what that's going to look like. It's going to be one way if there are like 3 students. So for example, if a student who tests positive, they had lunch, they were sitting at, in close proximity with max off with 3 people, those 4 students would be quarantined. So that could be one option of what instruction would look like for those students. If for some reason more students in the class would have to quarantine, that would be a different instructional kind of pathway. On Thursday, that's the conversation that we're having with other school leaders so that there's some continuity across what that looks like. For example, at Creative Minds, if a couple of students are need to quarantine, we have this kind of procedure versus the whole school shutting down because 3 students test. we want to continue to provide instruction for as many students as we can in a safe way. So if those, 3 or 4 students are need to be quarantined, we may rely on Seesaw, going back to Zoom, where they would be receiving some instructional virtually, but then also they may be able to Zoom into the class with the other students who did not have to. That may look a little different if the whole class needs to quarantine. And so we'll provide more details around what those specifics look like. We're working to create a tree that kind of shows if, this percentage of students or this number of students need to quarantine, the instruction will look like this. If this, this many students or this whole cohort needs to quarantine, instruction will look like this, because we also want students to kind of know what to expect. We also want families to know expect, and also our teachers really need to know so that we can shift and make adjustments really quickly. And we don't need to kind of, okay, this is what happened, we need to react. We want to have a plan in place so that we can quickly make the shifts in a way that makes sense for students and everyone knows what to expect.
Okay, great.
And I think it's important to emphasize a little bit real quick. This is a very recent development that we might be able to only send 3 kids home versus the entire cohort. And when we talk about cohort, we're talking about an entire grade, right? So that's why all the schools are getting together right now to make sure we use the best practices that are in place, learn from the schools that have been open for 3 weeks, where they've had to experience it. But we have the technology to make it work. We have the ability to pivot. What we want to get clear on, and this is what we're going to really push towards on Thursday, is under what scenario do we send a whole class home? Or under what scenario do we send a teacher home? And the teacher has to teach from home. Can they teach from home because they were exposed and they teach virtually and the kids are still in the classroom with another responsible adult? So that's all the things we're going to be talking about. I also think we should point out, in the event any children have to go home for any reason, learn from home for a while. We are from 3rd grade all the way through 8th grade. We are 2 devices to each student. So every child from 3rd grade to 8th grade is going to have a device in school that's going to stay in school so we can clean it and make sure it's safe and they can use it in school. And every child from 3rd grade on up is going to have a device at home so they can use it for additional learning if they want, or we don't do a lot of homework, but they could do homework on it. Or if they have to learn from home for a little while, they can learn from home and use that device. For our younger students, ECE, early childhood up through 2nd grade, if we do have to send somebody home, we will send a device home with them. So I saw a question, son returned the iPad requested by school, will they receive? Yes, they will. We have plenty of devices in hand. We thought about that early on, so we ordered them. Now there's some shortages and issues around that, but we have them in hand and we're getting them ready to go. Just again, trying to manage every single contingency. Sorry to jump in, Craig. I just wanted to really drive home that we're not just going to say, go home and sit there. Well, you're going to go home and learn, right? And we're going to do whatever we can to make sure it's a very high quality learning experience.
Yep, for everyone's 2nd grade and under, if they need to self-quarantine at home or the cohort is quarantined, we will provide them with the device. We're working through the logistics. Ideally, that day we're handing them one to take home. And for grades 3 through 8, everyone will be offered a device to keep at home. We're waiting on that shipment to come in. We'll deploy those over the first couple weeks of school. So everyone in grades 3 through 8 will have a brand new device that they'll be able to keep at home. Chuck, let me throw it back to you quickly before I have a couple fun ones for Nyamka in a few minutes. Someone asked if DCPS makes the decision to go all virtual. Do we have to follow DCPS, or how do charter LEAs make their own? They basically make their own decisions, but I'll let you go ahead and talk to that one.
So charter LEAs are basically an entire school district. So we are responsible for making that decision for ourselves, unless the mayor has emergency power, and then she can issue an order and shut schools and businesses down and those kind of things. At the moment, she's reduced her emergency power significantly. And I am very confident that the likelihood of DCPS going back to virtual, 100% virtual, is not going to happen. There's too much political risk, to be quite frank, in that happening. And we all have seen over the last year that it doesn't work for all kids. A small cohort of kids did really well virtually, but the vast majority do better in person. And the real emphasis is to get them back in person. So we will be very thoughtful about making that decision. The circumstances, again, will be driven by science. They'll be driven by what we're watching nationally in other school districts to see what's going on there and how they're reacting. It'll have to do with I think the risk level attached to the Delta variant as compared to the Alpha variant, which was much riskier health-wise for people. We'll be watching vaccination rates for students. I think once little ones can get vaccinated, we're going to be in a much more stable posture and hopefully focus a lot more on teaching kids than we are going to be on making sure they wash their hands all the time and doing all that kind of stuff. So we will make the decision for ourselves, but we will do it in consultation with all the experts. And I do think the charter schools are going to try to have some consistency around those factors that inform that decision, simply because we know families have kids in multiple schools and it can be very inconvenient. But also now we've all sort of become, amateur epidemiologists and scientists around this. And we're all having experiences around this, and we're a learning community. And if someone figures something out, they share it immediately with the rest of the group. So we really are focused on using the best possible practices out there.
Great, thanks, Chuck. Nyamka, and then I've still got a few more in queue that folks are asking, but Nyamka, if you can tackle when classroom assignments will be shared or when daily schedules will be shared.
Yes, that information is coming to you tomorrow. We've been working through with teachers during professional development to get those class lists squared away. We were waiting to have our, all of our final numbers of students enrolled and also any students who are producing virtual. So now we have all that information in class lists. So you should be getting an email from your teachers tomorrow with a welcome letter and what your kind of a glimpse of what the daily schedule will look like.
Okay, that sounds great. Appreciate that. Heather, are self-administered tests okay?
They should be fine. I mean, like you take it and you send it off as long as you're not doing the self-analysis. Yes. If you're doing your own swab or your own drool into the cup and sending it to an actual lab, yes, the self-administered test is okay.
Great, thanks. And let's stick with you around how, what our communication policy is going to be. If there's an outbreak in a classroom, will the whole community know? Will the individual classroom know?
Great, this is, I can answer. So how it will work is it's actually going to be a layered communication strategy. So what will happen is if there's a positive case and the student is in the building, we will contact the parents and ask the parents to come get the child immediately. Hopefully the communication will go both ways. We will do some quick contact tracing, and we will first notify anybody who's identified as a close contact. Then we will notify everyone who's in the cohort, and then we will notify the school-wide information. Please realize this process, depending on the time of day and when it happens, it can take anywhere from 2 to 12 hours to notify the entire community. When we notify people, we want to be transparent. We want to be very, very clear, but we also want to make sure that we're protecting the privacy of the person who tests positive. So we want to make sure that, one, we are being very clear with public health and we are being transparent, but we also want to protect the privacy. So if I test positive, for example, there would not be an email that goes out and says Heather has COVID. It would be there was a case of COVID, X number of students were dismissed. This is kind of the rough details of what happened in the timeline. Like if the person's been in the building, if they haven't been in the building, when's the last time they were in the building? Because there's so many factors that go into play. Kind of with the contact tracing, currently, as of today, how it sits is we actually have people in the school, myself and one other person that is going through the contact tracing to do a rough and dirty contact tracing, if you will, at the school level and exclude whoever we deem to be close contacts. And then DC Health right now will follow up and do a more in-depth one. So as a school, we may be more conservative and exclude a few people. And if for some reason we've excluded you and DC Health says you don't have to be excluded, they will notify the school, then you're cleared to return without fully self-isolating. But yes, we want to make sure that as a school, we've always been a little more conservative. to make sure that we're protecting the health and safety of everyone in the community.
Great, thanks. Nyamka, can you quickly recap? I've had a couple questions pop up around students that may have IEPs, when they may hear from the SPED team, or how we will deliver SPED services.
Sure. So many of our classes are actually taught, co-taught. So they'll have a general ed teacher and an inclusion teacher. So when you get that communication from your classroom teacher, that information will be in there. If you're, for some of the grade levels where there's a inclusion teacher for the grade level, that inclusion teacher will be reaching out to families, introducing themselves, letting them know who they are and how they'll be working with their students. When we come back in person, we'll continue to work through students' IEPs, just like we did pre-COVID and during COVID. So they'll continue to receive all those services that are identified in their IEPs.
Great, thanks, Nyamka. Heather, ping pong ball back to you on absent policy or recording absences and tardies in these different scenarios and how those may have been adapted or how those will work.
Yes, this is a really fun subject. OSSE has decided that they are going to track attendance a little different, including some like partial attendance codes. There's many attendance codes on the back end that the school will, but we will also be reporting to the state students who are learning remotely full-time because they have a medical waiver, as opposed to those who are learning remotely part of the time because they were excluded due to a positive case or being a close contact. So that it's actually differentiated. In terms of reporting to the CFSA, if a student is above kindergarten or older, the requirements are still the same right now. We are by school obligated to report to the CFA if somebody has 10 consecutive unexcused absences or has 25 total throughout the course of the year unexcused absences. So for example, if somebody's out with COVID, those are excused absences. And when you fill out the form, you indicate that. And so it doesn't reflect negatively. So if your family has a scenario where COVID becomes a problem and it runs through your household, like if, sadly, and I hope this never happens, but if it goes from the parent to the child, where we've asked you to stay away from school as it's through your house, it would not be, there's a policy and there's actually accountability for that written into it. So we will accommodate, we will support. I think it was announced before, but if somebody is told to self-isolate, we will be supporting with learning. We're not marking you as absent with no support whatsoever. Like the devices go home, assuming your child is well enough and your family is well enough to learn. There's a learning opportunity.
Great, thanks, Heather. We are over time, but there's just a few more questions. I want to make sure we get these answered for folks. For those that are hanging in, we appreciate that. Certainly want to make sure that we do address your questions. Heather, someone had asked, should they notify the school, or are we collecting the information if their child has been vaccinated?
Eventually, yes, it would be very helpful when you are the vaccination. It's not mandated, but if you want to self-report, example, when we're talking about our testing program, our Sentinel surveillance, people who are fully vaccinated should be tested on a frequency much less than those who are unvaccinated. So if you fill out the consent forms and you say yes, and you also say that my child is vaccinated, we know to put them on a different schedule than students whose vaccination status is unknown. And so that's kind of what I'm thinking about it. It's not so much, it's fully vaccinated and unknown status. So anybody who's not vaccinated or has not disclosed will be lumped together.
Great, thanks. There was a question about aftercare. Yes, aftercare for the older kids will start on Monday, and you pay, actually, we don't charge for August. The payment that was made will covers the month of September. So you would not be invoiced again here in early September for that month. Let's see, Heather, what about instant tests like pregnancy tests? Not a pregnancy test, but an instant COVID test.
What about them? I think at this point, again, like we said before, the instant test, if you test positive, it is positive. If you test negative, you should consider following up with a PCR test.
Gotcha.
Especially if you're showing any symptoms or you've been exposed to anybody with COVID. It's better safe than sorry should be your rule, folks. Like, don't risk your health just because it's inconvenient. That's all I'm going to say.
Okay, great. I'm trying to skim and see what we missed. If a child is under 12 And Heather, recap maybe once again, they need to be tested or self-isolated after travel outside of the DMV?
Yes, our current policy is if you are unvaccinated, you need to self-isolate for 3 to 5 days from return. So if you happen to go on a trip and you get home on Friday, you can take the test on Monday. If you get the results, you're cleared to return on Tuesday. If you happen to travel and get home Sunday, you would have to take the test on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. You would miss a few days of school. But yes, it's a safety precaution. It seemed like a double standard if we told all of our staff, you must be vaccinated to work in this environment. And then we told all of our families, it's a free for all when it comes to safety and health. We really want a consistent message that protects everyone in the community.
Okay, thanks. We had a question about how students will be grouped or cohorted. I'll let Naimka talk to that in general, but the specific question was, can we put ensure that a child that is not vaccinated is put only in a classroom where families may be vaccinated? And the answer to that is no, we're not collecting the vaccination status of parents, family members, and have no way to track that. Maybe Naimka, you can talk in general how we try to group and cohort students together.
Sure. So a big shout out to our teachers who help put these groups together because they know the students so well. So for example, the second grade teachers from last year worked together to put the classes together because they know which students work really well together to create really balanced classrooms. So that same sort of process was done this year. And for new students, it was kind of, if we spoken to the families and had guidance, we kind of put them in classes to create further balance in the classrooms.
Great, thanks. And this one wasn't necessarily asked, but I've kind of picked up on it from some of the questions, and I'll put it to Chuck and I am because I think it's a super important one. How we're going to welcome kids back and make sure they have the social and emotional supports they need after such a long time away, as I'm sure that's kind of one of the underlying questions. Again, it wasn't specifically asked, but due to the thoughtful questions and everything that folks are putting forward, I think that's a great one for you both to address.
So I'll start quickly, Naimka, but you can speak to a lot of the really beautiful details that are going on in professional development now and things like that. But Creative Minds throughout this process has been a champion for SEL. Everybody's been talking about learning loss and time on task and all these sort of business terms approach to education. What we know, because we're educators and we've been doing this a long time, is when kids are safe, they can learn. When kids aren't hungry, they can learn. So that's why we served all those meals last year and delivered all those meals. That's why we focused on the kids who were not able to learn in a virtual environment and brought them back first. That's why we had approximately 200 students on campus this summer, because we thought those are some of the kids that are going to have the hardest time adjusting and need the most support. So let's get them back early, get their feet wet in the pool a little bit, help ourselves figure out what works best, and then really put some of those practices in place. School-wide, we've made a fair number of pretty significant changes around staffing in particular, and we talked about this at the board meeting, so in great detail. So I encourage you to go on the website or request a copy of the board meeting, because the board is very interested in the same topic too. What are you doing to make sure kids feel safe? We have hired a dean of school culture. He is an amazing former principal, former reverend, former teacher, working on his PhD around socio-emotional learning for African-American boys right now. An incredibly gentle and caring soul who is basically his sole job is to help coordinate our efforts to make school feel safe. It's not behavior. So we're very clear. We're not like, this is the punisher. No, in fact, the people who report to him aren't called behavior coaches anymore. They're called school support specialists. Because it is really about this building this community, this joint accountability that we were talking about earlier with the code of conduct and making sure we're clear what our expectations are of you and your expectations are of us. That kind of constant transparency. Now we have a person that's going to sit in, and he's gone off and gotten trained to be an expert in conscious discipline, which we began to introduce 2 years ago as sort of our new sort of school culture model. It coalesces so nicely with CMI's mission around making sure all students get educated and building relationships and focus on individual learning opportunities and individual strengths and challenges. And the really powerful part about it is it acknowledges the role that adults play in that relationship. So if a child's yelling and screaming, someone yelling at them doesn't make it any better. In fact, that makes it worse. But now our adults are being trained to realize that before that happens and learning how to de-escalate things and how that's better and makes people feel safer. So I'm really excited about adding him. We've also doubled down on academic folks. So we have 2 more instructional coaches. We're hiring 2 full-time tutors. We're really throwing as many resources as we can shake loose to make sure our kids feel safe when they come back. And I know there's specific plans about day 1 and what that's going to feel like. And we always spend 2 weeks sort of getting classroom routines down and understanding, getting to know each other. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Nyamka, sort of what's it's going to be like when a child walks into our school.
Yeah, so one thing, I just want to share this, which I think is a kind of cool, fun fact. Over the summer, we've had regular communication with our staff. And one of the questions was like, what are you most looking forward to returning to school? And it was really great to see that the teachers just want to see the kids and they're excited to be back with them in person. So that just really shows how connected, even in that virtual space, that our teachers were with our students. And just like the excitement to talk about what, inviting students back into the building as they start to put their classrooms together, as they start to talk about instruction and who's going to be in their classroom, and talking really about what morning meeting is going to look like, being really intentional about providing spaces for students to share like what their experiences have been during this time when we've not been together, and creating a space where students feel welcome, no matter if they're new to Creative Minds, if they've been here for years before, but just being able to welcome students back no matter where they are, from a comfort level with coming back to school, comfort level, some are very excited to see their friends. Some we know may be fearful around, getting sick at school. So teachers are just been fantastic during these 2 weeks of PD, really being open and excited to be able to welcome students no matter where they are in their comfort level with coming back to school. We've had an amazing day with conscious discipline representative come and talk to our middle school students. We have that for lower school. And to spend a whole day just talking about building relationships with students, I think really speaks volumes to how important we feel that is for our program and welcoming students back into the building. Just want to also highlight another piece with the instructional coaches. We have increased that number as well, because we know that we want teachers to be able to focus on building those relationships, focus on instruction, but we also know that they're going to need tools and support to be able to do that well. So we wanted to up the support that we were able to offer teachers to be able to do that well. So just a lot of intentional things that we did, realizing that social emotional piece is really critical in welcoming students back to the building, but not only social emotional well-being of our students, but then also our team members. Yep. And really being intentional about our planning and thinking about, designing our PD, what that looks like, setting it up, modeling, like, one day Lorna was out and Abby were out, like welcoming staff into coming into PD, just doing that for the teachers. And then also the teachers will do that for the students. So just a lot of thought going into welcoming everyone back.
Great.
And I think we have a unique opportunity too as a school. Just one last point on this. A lot of 97% of our teachers are returning, which is remarkable. But what that gives us is that experience that they had last year. So they know the kids know them. We know they're resilient. We know they want to be here. We know they understand Creative Minds. So that's going to also create community very quickly, and familiarity very quickly. So I think it's going to be, I'm very optimistic about it being a really strong start to a school year. And I can't understate how hard everybody, all 123 people worked their personal parts off to get this done. And if you're interested in diving into more details on the website, you can look at the incredibly long continuing education plan. You can look at our safety plans. All the resources we've talked about are posted there. We'll put them on social media. We make them available at any time. So we're doing, yeoman's work to make sure everybody feels good about being there, feels safe, and feels heard. For our staff, we've changed health plans. So we have a health plan that provides, no copay for mental health services because they went through a pandemic too. And so they shouldn't have to pay out of pocket. So we're doing a lot of things in the background too, that I think the ops team should be called out for, to be very thoughtful about the fact that our staff feel safe, that all of our staff showed up for PD and maybe one or two said, well, no, I'm not comfortable, and resigned. That's it. And I get it, because out of 123, if we lose one, that's fewer than when things were normal, to be quite frank. So I'm really optimistic, and I just want to publicly congratulate Amka, Craig, Heather, Stephanie, Jen, all the teachers, all the school leaders who did this. So that's my little speech to you all. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Chuck. I've got one last question in queue, and then I think we'll wrap it. Ms. Long, if you can touch on, especially our ECE families, and will they have an opportunity to meet their teachers, and kind of when the schedule or what the schedule is for ECE?
Yeah, so you'll be getting the schedule tomorrow for what ECE looks like, because I don't want to spend a lot of time there. But I also wanted to, I saw the question about mask and the students seeing staff without masks. We are working to see if we can get videos of teachers without masks, but they will not. So they will see what the teacher's face looks like without the mask, but it'll be a video or a picture. And then the other question I saw was, when will ECE get to meet their teachers? And so teachers, all the ECE teachers, there is an open house for those ECE families new to CMI on Friday. If you have questions about that, please reach out to the front desk or to Abby or to myself, and we can give you details where you have an opportunity for open house for ECE families.
All right, thanks, Nyamka. That's all the questions. Thank you, everyone, for your time. I'm going to pass it back to Chuck to kind of close us out for tonight.
Can I say one thing? I just wanted to give a huge shout out to Abby, Lorna, and Emmanuel. They have been fantastic with, working behind the scenes to put PD together for the staff.
Absolutely.
And just really being an amazing support and thought partner in this whole planning for reentry. And I just really want to give them a huge shout out for all that they've done.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been, as the deck started with, a community effort. And we have an amazing community of leaders in the school who have put their heart and soul into this. And you families are part of that community. You have put your trust in us. You have shared your most precious resource with us and trusted us to take care of them. And we are so honored and humbled by that. That's why we are trying so very hard to make sure we think of everything we can think of. We add as many layers of safety as humanly possible, and we communicate to you as much as we can around these things. Again, any questions that you want to talk about offline, reach out to any of us. We're happy to answer them. And we are so excited about Monday. We're so excited about it being our 10th anniversary. And what the next 10 years are going to hold for us. And I think it's going to be a fun year thinking about that with the community. So we just have a beautiful future ahead. So thank you all. And thank you for sticking out longer than the scheduled time. But we really wanted to make sure we answered all the questions. So have a great night. We'll see you Monday.